Dear participants to the conference, it is a great honor for me to address this distinguished audience. I'm pleased to be with you in my home city of Moscow, and I wish to convey to you the warmest greetings of Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. Guterres was grateful for the invitation extended to the United Nations to attend this prestigious international conference and wished you fruitful deliberations. I would also like to thank the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation for bringing us together for the 7th edition of this conference, which has become an important substantive contribution to promoting international security cooperation in the face of complex and evolving challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, the global security is a complex mosaic of overlapping and intertwined factors which are creating new fault lines around the world. Terrorism is among one of the most negative and dangerous results of such fault lines. Today, the fight against terror is entering a new phase. The Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant has experienced major military setbacks in Iraq and in the Syrian Arab Republic. It has lost all its urban strongholds. Its infrastructure and military capacity have suffered devastating blows under the combined efforts of the Iraqi and Syrian governments with the support of the international community, including the Russian Federation. Yet, we should not drop our guard and relent in our efforts. ISIS and its affiliates continue to pose a significant and evolving threat around the world, and so does Al-Qaeda. Over the last 3 decades, global terrorism has rapidly captured vast areas and has become an unprecedented threat to international peace, security, and development. No country is immune from this threat, and no country, no matter how powerful, can solve this problem by itself. The scourge from terrorism transcends cultures and geographical boundaries and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, or ethnic group. Ladies and gentlemen, terrorism is a sophisticated threat. We need to stay at least one step ahead to anticipate, prevent, and counter new attacks. Terrorists are not sitting idle. They are actively on the lookout for the new blow they can inflict, the new opportunity to outsmart us and escape our vigilance. The military defeat of ISIS has led to the emergence of a new threat, returning or relocating foreign terrorist fighters. Many returnees are well-trained and equipped to carry out new terrorist acts and strengthen and activate underground sleeper cells. Terrorists are trying to abuse new technological advances, including information and communication technologies, drones, and artificial intelligence. They are using social media, including encrypted communications and the dark web, to spread their sinister expertise, coordinate, or incite supporters to carry out attacks in other countries. The next battleground against terrorism will be in the cyberspace. Terrorist groups continue also to seek ways to acquire weapons of mass destruction, and there has been progress in enhancing disarmament and non-proliferation regimes, but we must remain alert to the threat of WMD terrorism. Yet terrorists are ready to use whatever does the trick: vehicles, bladed weapons, and the rest of it. Such attacks, of course, do not require special training and planning, and are therefore extremely difficult to detect. Many of these attacks have been carried out in public areas to maximize casualties and insult fear. Ladies and gentlemen, the stakes are high, and the challenges ever more complex by the international community is not starting to counter this scourge from scratch. There is a strong international legal and political framework against terrorism already in place. The consensus UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy adopted in 2006 provides a necessary international framework, further developed in relevant Security Council resolutions on counterterrorism. Our focus now should be on its balanced implementation. There is a need for member states to enhance their cooperation against terrorism at the global, regional, and bilateral levels, in accordance with their commitments and obligations under international law. The exchange of information, lessons learned, and good practices among law enforcement, judicial, and counterterrorism practitioners need to become more proactive and systematic. Operational information should be shared through relevant databases such as Interpol and through national initiatives such as the International Counterterrorism Database administered by the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation. UN member states should step up international and national interagency cooperation to counter the financing of terrorism. Financial intelligence needs to be effectively integrated within broader counterterrorism efforts, including investigations and prosecutions. In this regard, I would like to express my appreciation for the Russian Federation, which championed the adoption of the milestone UN Security Resolution 2191 in 2015 on countering the financing of ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups. I would also like to particularly note the Russian initiative to combat the propaganda of terror on the Internet. Besides interstate and interagency cooperation, it is important to tap fully into the potential of public-private partnerships. State authorities have the primary responsibility for counterterrorism, but engaging with industry and businesses is instrumental to counter terrorism financing, to prevent terrorist misuse of new technologies, to protect vulnerable targets and critical infrastructure, including from cyber terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, the approach focused on dismantling already existing terror networks and thwarting attacks is not enough. The UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy emphasizes the need for a comprehensive approach to counter-terror, including address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism and stem the involvement of new recruits into the criminal activity. Not only the state, but the entire society should play a responsible part in this. We can put terrorists in jails, but we cannot put ideas in jail. We must confront terrorism on the emotional and ideological level to win hearts and minds, and in the first place of the youth. This has become an essential component of our fight against terror, perhaps the most difficult yet most important part of our battle for ultimate victory. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Secretary General included countering terrorism into his top priorities. In this context, he has emphasized two key themes. First, promote and broad international cooperation, and second, to translate these ideas into practice. And the Secretary General's first reform initiative was to create the Office of Counterterrorism, which I lead. The task is to provide general leadership to United Nations counterterrorism efforts. In the context of further reform, the Secretary General initiated in February the signing of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Coordination Compact. The compact aims to further strengthen the coordination and coherence in the counterterrorism activities of 35 different United Nations entities, plus Interpol, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and the World Customs Organization. The United Nations Secretary-General will convene an international high-level conference of head of counterterrorism agencies of member states on 28th and 29th of June to enhance international counterterrorism cooperation. The conference will focus on practical aspects of our efforts, including sharing of information, expertise and resources, addressing violent extremism when conducive to terrorism, including misuse of new technologies, countering the foreign terrorist fighters phenomenon, and role of the United Nations in promoting international cooperation. We hope that this high-level conference will be attended by member states at the level of their senior-most officials, ministers in charge of counterterrorism, including heads of law enforcement and intelligence agencies and national counterterrorism coordinators, many of whom are present in this room today. Ladies and gentlemen, in June, member states of the United Nations will review the implementation of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. This biennial review of the strategy provides a good opportunity to member states to review the global threat of terrorism anew and identify gaps in the implementation of the UN strategy. I am positive that the upcoming discussion and its results will reinforce international consensus against terrorism and set a clear direction for international efforts in this area over the next 2 years. I count on the active involvement of the Russian Federation in this important and timely conversation under the auspices of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to stress that terrorism is a threat which continues to evolve. It is not expected to vanish in the near future. There is an urgent need, therefore, for an adequate response from the international community to this plague of the 21st century, which threatens all countries without exception. Only by working together, focusing on practical collaboration and assisting those member states most affected by terrorism, we will be able to win. I thank you very much for your attention.